No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed. For all practical purposes, today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent, because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. The only limits will be self-imposed by the president alone. This decision today has continued the court's attack in recent years on a wide range of long-established legal principles in our nation, from gutting voting rights and civil rights, to taking away a woman's right to choose, to today's decision that undermines the rule of law of this nation.
Undermining the rule of law of the nation, of course, that is that presidents have some kind of immunity when dealing with official acts of president. It doesn't even feel like that crazy of a statement to even make. Something I assume most people thought was already some kind of law. The impeachment of the Supreme Court, and of course, this comes from some of the top leaders in the squad.
That's right. So this comes from your favorite Congresswoman and mine, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She tweeted yesterday after the Supreme Court ruling, the Supreme Court has become consumed by a corruption crisis beyond its control. Today's ruling represents an assault on American democracy. It is up to Congress to defend our nation from this authoritarian capture. I intend on filing articles of impeachment upon our return. So, Professor Hutchison, the distinguished Congresswoman from New York, is now saying that when they get back from their recess, obviously Congress isn't there working the July 4th week and sometime after, she plans on filing articles of impeachment against the Supreme Court. What's your take on that?
Well, my take is that AOC will simply file articles of impeachment against the conservative justices, the ones she doesn't like. So she will basically make a selective filing. But if you look at this in context, it's important to keep in mind Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, he's also attacked the Supreme Court. He has said that the House will engage in aggressive oversight. Joe Biden has essentially suggested that the Supreme Court must be attacked because no one in the United States is king. These individuals fail to understand that this particular decision protects Democratic presidents just as much as it protects Republicans. And so one of the things to keep in mind is that during the Obama-Biden administration, the Obama-Biden administration targeted American citizens in Yemen and killed them. And this particular decision protects President Obama and arguably protects Joe Biden. So this particular decision requires a balanced review, and we should anticipate that anything that comes from the mouth of AOC, Hakeem Jeffries, and Joe Biden will be unbalanced.
So we saw something interesting yesterday when this decision first came out. Was at first all the chyrons on CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News to some extent were saying things like the Supreme Court gives limited immunity, things of that nature. And even we in our pre-radio meeting were like, I think it's a little bit more broad than they're letting on. And then it seems like the left read the opinion and then quickly changed their tune from there's some limited immunity to this is literally the worst thing in the world. Democracy is over. The president had to give a speech from the White House, quoting from the dissent of Sotomayor. And what do you think was that there? They were first trying to get a capture on the narrative by downplaying it, or do you think they just hadn't read it yet?
Well, I think it's probably both. And I think once they read it and once they digested it, they realized that their worst fears were being realized, which was essentially that Donald Trump would not likely face trial on the January 6th election interference claim until 2025, probably at the earliest. And if he wins the presidency, more likely than not, he will never face charges with respect to that activity. But what these individuals fail to realize is that the Supreme Court is looking at history. It is saying there is something called the separation of powers. And yes, presidents are entitled to absolute immunity with respect to official acts. They're not entitled to absolute immunity with respect to unofficial acts. And the president is entitled to the presumption of absolute immunity. And so one of the things that I think is imperative with respect to your questions, Will, is that the left digested the opinion and then began to freak out. Why? Because the left realized that Joe Biden cannot beat Donald Trump in a fair and free election. And so I think they're very worried, particularly given Biden's performance last Thursday, which was a night which will live in infamy, basically the election is now baked into the cake and many Americans see it. And so unless Joe Biden withdraws, which right now I don't have any evidence of, more likely than not, most prognosticators are suggesting that Donald Trump will likely win in November. This is a horrifying prospect. And so you're seeing commentators in the United States and even in Great Britain suggesting at the end of the day that Biden has only one option, which is to eliminate, perhaps assassinate his opponent.
That's right. The Huffington Post ran a headline which essentially misread the opinion and suggested that now President Biden could assassinate his political rival and get away with it under this newfound immunity that they're saying the Supreme Court found. But there's another element of this, and we actually had a caller about it yesterday, about the sentencing of President Trump in Manhattan. And it, on the face of this ruling, it doesn't seem like it would apply at all to the case that was there. That had to do with the campaign. It had to do with business records, not what you would consider presidential acts, because he wasn't the president when they alleged these crimes happened. But what you saw yesterday was quickly the Trump team file a letter to the judge ahead of the July 11th sentencing. So that would be next Thursday when President Trump was scheduled to be sentenced, asking for a delay in that sentencing and also in light of the Supreme Court's ruling. And they highlighted something interesting, was that some of the evidence that Alvin Bragg brought into this case was evidence that he procured while the president was president. And what the attorneys are trying to argue is that there's an angle here where, reading the Supreme Court's opinion, if they're using as evidence something that was an official act, that can't be used and taken as evidence against him. Tell us a little bit about what happened today and about that sentencing and what kind of you read on that legal move.
Well, number one, it looks like the judge may be open to delaying sentencing. Alvin Bragg is open to delaying sentencing. Number two, if you look at the Trump attorney's letter, it is actually grounded in logic because Alvin Bragg adduced evidence which basically was procured after Donald Trump took office. And so Donald Trump engaged arguably in official acts with respect to election finance and other related matters, which Alvin Bragg referred to at trial. So even though the conduct at issue that was charged against Donald Trump basically referred to conduct which occurred before he took office, some of the conduct actually occurred afterwards. So if Alvin Bragg still wants to rely on the evidence tied to Trump's conduct after he took office, then it's very possible that we need, A, to delay the sentence, but B, we may need to reopen the trial in order to basically eliminate such evidence on which the jurors relied. That, I think, is a very important issue. My legal judgment is, however, that more likely than not, Judge Marcan will simply kick this up to the Court of Appeals and say, Court of Appeals, you deal with it. We've had a trial, we've had a judgment, but I think the Trump attorneys were very, very sharp in not delaying issuing a letter within hours of the Supreme Court opinion.
Because on its face, we even discussed that, it seemed as though it wouldn't affect it at all, but as the attorneys were able to pull out, there was evidence which should have been precluded because of this ruling. And now that is still a long shot, I would think, and I'm sure the professor agrees with me on
Absolutely.
that. But it at least adds an element of uncertainty. And as of right now, it appears that the judge and Alvin Bragg is not opposing delaying that sentence, which was supposed to be handed down next Thursday.
And again, we are day 2 of our Life and Liberty Drive. All gifts are doubled. So if you have a amount, whether it's $5, $50, whatever it could be, make that donation today, and there's another donor on the other side ready to match that during this month. So again, day 2, help us kick off this first week strong. It's kind of a shorter week because it's a holiday week, obviously celebrating the 4th of July later in the week. So do it right now. If you're watching, you can scan the QR code. Also, if you're watching, you're brand new, hit that subscribe button if you're on YouTube or on Rumble, and that thumbs up. That really does help. So if you see that right now, I know you're saying, what does it do? Helps more people get this kind of message in their feed.